Starting from today, we start on the modern period. This is modern period part one, 1914 to the present. So what it means for us to talk about the present, again, that'll depend on how I end the course. I'm thinking like if something exciting happens because Mr. Trump is in China right now, right? I don't know if you guys care about these things. If something exciting happens out of his trip to China, right? Maybe I could include something like that in like my last lecture. So we're gonna talk about uh, briefly the introduction to the modern period, and then I guess for the most of the class today, I'll be talking about new themes. New themes. There are many, many new themes for the modern period. So I'll talk a lot about that. And then toward the end, I want to get started with World War One. I want to get started with that because what happened last year is I tried to cover World War One and World War Two in one lecture, and it just didn't work. There was way too much for us to cover. So I figure if I could just get through maybe three or four slides today, then I'll have a little bit more of a breathing space for next Tuesday. I'm sorry, next Thursday. What am I saying? Next Tuesday is the story of the United States, part two. Okay, so let's get going. We have a lot to cover as always, but let's see if it's interesting. This should be interesting, more interesting than the other periods because this is our period. The modern period is ours. This is our period. We had the long 19th century. Its influences are still being felt. The 19th century influences, like Industrial Revolution, the monopolizing of the technological advances by the West. And because of that monopoly, the West dominated with a superior military. That made all the difference. Cultural, political, economic forces, the ideals of modernization are still with us as well. I talked about modernization theory, right? And it's not a perfect theory, but people still think in terms of modernization theory. And also the world system theory, that's still with us too. And there is a close connection with modernization and westernization. I think you guys all know that already. I don't think we should conflate modernization and westernization. I don't think we should conflate the two. I don't know if I talked about it enough before. And I'm guilty of that as well. I say sometimes we're all Westerners now, right? We've all westernized. And I think in some ways that is very true in terms of like culture. A lot of it is westernization. We have become Western. And that is not a bad thing. But modernization, I don't think should be equated with westernization because I think we're giving them too much by saying modernization is equal to westernization, right? Just for a while, they had a monopoly. But that doesn't mean modernization itself has to remain a Western thing. It's not like I can see the difference with like certain cultural things. We talk about cultural appropriation. Like you shouldn't do that, right? Like how I'm gonna make China the enemy right now. Like some Chinese people, they want to say kimchi is a Chinese thing, right? And then Koreans get mad, right? No, this is ours, right? You revisionists, you're trying to steal our culture away from us. Like, that kind of thing I could understand. Culture is always a sensitive matter, but I think modernization is a totally different thing, right? We can't say, I mean, the West can't say modernization is ours, right? You're trying to steal our something from us. That doesn't work. Okay. Before that, I think there was something I wanted to say. It's okay. I can't think of it. So let's move on to B. So A is basically 19th century influences are still with us, even today. Modernization period is usually divided into three phases. This is how we teach the modern period in world history courses. The first is, I mean, you can divide it further, right? The first is World War One. If it gets really detailed, then you talk about the interwar years between World War One and World War Two, and then you get to World War Two. But that's generally the period. 1914 to 1945 is a chunk, a big chunk, formalized segment, section of the modern period. This includes the Great Depression, new powers like Japan, Germany, the USSR, China. And then 1945 to 1990 is the Cold War. So we'll have a lesson on that as well. What happened during that time? This is when the United States and the Soviet Union were, we say, locked in an existential crisis or existential struggle, an existential struggle. One had to die, right? There can only be one at the end. So it was either the free democratic Western world championed by the United States or the Soviet Union and China, Soviet Union and China and some of the other its satellite states. And then the last one is usually the post-Cold War. So those are the four lectures. For the post-Cold War, I actually made a note here, right? Our coverage could include modern democracies and cultural changes. Most likely, that's what we'll talk about. Modern democracies and certain cultural changes that happen post-Cold War. Probably not economics. I taught like economics post-Cold War once, and it was difficult, and we just ran out of time for other things. So just democracies, cultural changes, and maybe some other things, right? Like I said, if something special happens with Trump and Xi Jinping, maybe we'll talk about that. Or if, God knows, only God knows, right? If something should happen between Ukraine and Russia, and they have some kind of peace or ceasefire agreement or something, we could talk about those things too. So the last modern period lecture is a little bit intentionally fuzzy. Here are the new themes of the modern period. As I said, there are many, many new themes for us to talk about. Um, there are so many new themes that we cannot mention them all. We can only cover the most important ones. And even the ones that we cover here today, many of them we'll just be covering just today. We can't come back to them later because there's so many of them. And it begs the question, do we have so many new themes now because our period is special? Is our period different from the other periods? I know that from what little I read, I know that people in the 19th century, they felt that they were living in a very special period. Never before in history these things happened, right? So they thought they were living in a very special period of time. So maybe it's some kind of hallucination that we all have that our period is special, much more special than the other periods, where it's all the same thing. Maybe we're fooling ourselves. But I have a feeling that our period really is special, right? I can't help it. I don't think we can help it. I think all of us, I think, have this sense that the modern period is different from the other periods. Okay, so we'll go through some of these things. And let's see if we are justified or we have some valid reasons for thinking that. First of all, Professor Stearns, I guess one last time I mention him, he's like the guiding light or the star. Um, but especially for the modern period, I will also be uh, taking a lot of lessons from Pamela Redcliffe because I don't know if I introduced her enough, but she actually teaches a course specializing in the 20th century. So she has a lot more to say, a lot more details to say about the modern period. So these two are some of the references, not the only two, but some of the references for the things that we'll be covering in our course. So these are the themes, the new themes of the modern period. The first one is the relative decline of the West. The relative decline, the relative decline. The West is not the all-powerful, untouchable, super, I don't know, civilizational thing that it was in the long 19th century. There's been a decline. And the decline, I hate to say it, but because I like the West, the decline seems to be accelerating somewhat these days. Seems like. Um, but the decline started right from the beginning with the two world wars, the world wars. They're seen by at least some of the scholars as basically a civil war, two civil wars. Why civil wars? Because we view the Western civilization as one civilization. They were fighting amongst themselves. It wasn't like, East versus West. It was just Western powers basically went insane. They went insane. I guess, they let power get to their head, right? Get to their heads. Especially World War One. It was just Western powers acting crazy, I think. So that was the Civil War. The Second World War was a very different war. We say it was a very different war. It had to be fought, so we say. But so the wars, they greatly weakened the West. Europe was in ruins, and not so the United States. This is how the United States came on to the world stage as the one indispensable nation. But economically, politically, population damages, millions of people died in these two wars. Um, Regarding this idea of the Civil War, this is a guy named Victor Hugo. Oh, Mr. Victor Hugo of the Les Mis and the Hunchback of Notre Dame, these novelists. He said, a war between Europeans is basically a civil war, he said, because we are one people, Europeans. The military capacity, the West is still the most powerful, but the West's military capacity, we say, greatly diminished in the modern period. It keeps diminishing. The first instance, I suppose, was, oh, I mean, World War One, World War Two, these things don't really count because it was fight among Western powers, except I guess Japan. Japan wasn't the West, but it was part of the West. It was at the table with the other empires, right? So um, I guess the first time the West was rebuffed in a major way was China, right? During the Korean War. They thought they had the war done, and then the Chinese army came flooding down and drove back the Americans. Uh, the West learned something called asymmetric warfare. That began to be a thing in the 20th century. Countries learned tactics to fight the West because fighting the West head on was not feasible, not realistic. So they learned how to fight asymmetric warfare. And a great example of that was Vietnam, the Viet Congs. They couldn't match the West in terms of pure military power, but they ended up winning the war, right? So that, and then these things kept happening, like in Afghanistan. The last was Iraq. Um, by the time we get to Iraq, this is like 2001, 2002, is it? Of course, militarily, is it 2002? 2003? Thank you, thank you. Uh, by the time the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, they thought it was done far too easily, right? Because the Iraqi soldiers, they just kind of faded away. They all fled. It wasn't much of a fight. So the United States thought, oh, that was a pretty easy war, right? But then came the asymmetric warfare, the guerrilla warfare, the urban fighting. There was one city that was especially like in the headline news, I think it was called Fallujah. Is that Fallujah? There's this one city, especially where the Americans, like everything went wrong and a lot of Americans died. So that's where they started using the phrase fuba. Apparently, that's where that expression started. If you don't know what fuba is, it's like a swear word. It's like effed up beyond recognition or something. So that's where the United States discovered even a country like Iraq, where they thought this war couldn't be any simpler, they got bogged down in asymmetric warfare. Um, Yet another example is, I think what is happening with Iran, right? The United States thought this is going to be easy, these bunker busters, right? And they actually did say, militarily the war is over, right? We beat them. All we are waiting for is for them to basically give us their surrender, but they're not surrendering. It's asymmetric warfare. I suppose yet another kind of thing that's happening is with Russia and Ukraine. I'm not sure if that qualifies as asymmetric warfare, actually. It's just a different kind of warfare. They call it the first drone war, right? Everything's drones with Ukraine and Russia. But so this is part of the development that happened in the 20th century. And the other non-Western countries modernized non-Western states, including some countries going nuclear, China, Pakistan, India, North Korea, would say Israel. But in terms of like non-nuclear conventional military modernization, many, many non-Western countries became very, very powerful in the 20th century. And they all bought their very, very modern, very powerful weapons from the United States. The United States was the preeminent weapons seller, right? I'm sure they made a lot of money, but they made these non-Western countries uh, modernize their military and become powerful. All right, I have this picture here. The most powerful militaries in 2024, that's 2 years ago. I'm pretty sure it's pretty much the same right now. If you look at this, the United States is by far the most powerful in terms of like conventional weaponry, right? Russia is supposed to be the second, China is third, India is fourth because it's a huge country, right? Huge country. And notice it's a surprise, South Korea. That's a surprise. Did you guys know? I didn't know. I kind of knew, but apparently South Korea is considered one of the really powerful militaries in the world. I guess because of North Korea, right? Because we're so close, our conventional military power has to be overwhelming in order to um, have not tempt North Korea to even just imagine trying to invade South Korea. But of course, North Korea has nuclear weapons now, so that's a big complication there. I was listening to this news just a couple of days ago, and they said Kim Jong-un signed some kind of document. Do you guys know about this? He signed some kind of document that said, in case he gets assassinated, in case he's assassinated, they're supposed to fire off their nuclear weapons. Did you guys hear about this? That's ridiculous. So the guy gets into some kind of an accident, he dies, and then North Korea fires their nuclear weapons. To who? They're going to fire at South Korea or the United States? Uh, that's the, the, uh, They would assume that the United States assassinated Kim Jong-un. Oh, it was a reaction to Iran. Oh, I didn't know that. I just heard that he signed this document. That was a warning to the United States. That makes sense. Apparently, the United States is just killing people now for no reason at all. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. Let's move on. Let's move on to, so that was B, right? Relative decline. And please remember the word relative. It is a relative decline. The United States, especially the United States and the Western powers, obviously they are still by far much, 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 much stronger than the other countries in the world. The United States is overwhelmingly more powerful than any of the other countries. That's why, the president of the United States could act like a bully, right? Because he has the mighty military power of the United States behind him. Another theme for the modern period is decolonization. This, I suppose, was a wonderful thing that happened. It was a positive thing that happened. The West basically let go of their colonies as nations declared independence. Currently, 193 UN member nations. World is now much, much more diverse because the West, it's a good way to put it, right? They basically allowed these nations, former colonies, to become independent nations. In the spirit of, rising, everyone rising together into, a world of greater freedom and greater autonomy for each nation. Of course, in reality, many of these nations had to fight. They had to fight for their independence. But especially like some countries like the United States and Great Britain, they did actually let many, many of their former colonies go uh, willingly, peacefully, right? There was peaceful transfer of, I guess, governance for many, many countries. So that was a good thing that happened, decolonization. Of course, the problem is, I don't think I have it listed as one of the themes because we don't want to get that detailed. But one of the problems with decolonization is post-colonial, or sometimes, I guess some people call it neo-colonialism, right? Colonialism disappeared, but neo-colonialism in the era of post-colonial um, world is still going on today, right? But that's decolonization. Here's a yet another theme: the middle class, the rise of the middle class. That is a modern phenomenon. In 1914, the dominant social class was landed aristocracy. Landed aristocracy, the upper class. They were super rich. Um, most of the world's population, most were poor. Majority of the population was rural farming. I think it was like maybe 90% or something, right? And now the situation is completely reversed. But this is at the beginning of the modern period, rural societies. Now, landed aristocracy are mostly gone. I mean, we still have rich people like billionaires, but they're, tech billionaires are a little different, right? We don't have landed aristocracy anymore. I mean, mostly gone, mostly gone. Majority are now urban middle class. That is the majority of our planet's population is the middle class. New political systems came into being in the modern times. Political regimes used to be predominantly monarchies or aristocracies. 90% of the world before World War I was monarchies or aristocracy, they say, 90%. But now almost all regimes are democratic or authoritarian. Many monarchies are now largely symbolic. Britain, Japan. I mean, do we think they can actually command anyone, command any organization? I don't know. I don't think they can. If King Charles II, if King Charles were to walk down the street and talk to a British gentleman, right? There, my man, I order you to kneel, right? And, wipe my booth or something, right? He gets slapped in the face, right? Like the other British person would not care that he was King Charles. He would just slap him in the face. How dare you, right? You're not my king. Oh, I said, okay, you're my king, but we know that you're just a puppet figure. You get it's some kind of insult. I actually don't know about Japan, but I expect it's pretty much the same thing. These kings are symbolic figures. I think there are some real monarchies, maybe in the Middle East, maybe in some European countries, but mostly they're gone. Democracy has taken over to such an extent that even dictators want to present themselves as supporters of democracy, champions of democracy. Look no further than North Korea. North Korea, It's basically a dynasty now, isn't it? Kim Jong-un grooming his daughter to be the next, I guess, queen of North Korea. But North Korea is DPRK. What is D? Democratic People's Republic of Korea, right? Even dictatorships want to present themselves as, yes, we are a democracy. They hold elections. They hold elections. I don't think Russia is a democracy right now, but they hold elections, and Mr. Putin gets like 90% of the votes or something. But they say, "Here, you see, Russians, they still love me. We are a democratic society." So the idea of democracy has definitely taken over the world, right? Nobody wants to go against the people, the majority, the crowd. Gender relations. I don't want to talk about this too much, but there is a lot to say about gender relations. Changed only in the modern age. I mean, it started changing before in the long 19th century, but really uh, significant changes only happened in the modern age. This is a thing that I guess this is a place to say this. Women's issues are not minority issues. This is a common misconception because we talk about minority issues, and when we talk about minority issues, we talk about like different ethnic minorities, like African Americans, Black Americans, LGBTQ community, like Asian minorities in, like the United States or Canada. And then we talk about women. Oh yeah, we have to talk about women's issues too, as if women are one of those minority groups. That is a common misconception because women are not a minority, right? Women are actually half the Earth's population. So it's kind of a weird thing. It's a perception is not reflected in, sorry, the reality is not reflected in the perception. So this gender relation, you should not be grouping this together with other like minority issues. Women's issues is not the same, it's not in the same category. Until the 19th century, most women had no legal cultural standing apart from men. They were considered subordinate to husbands. And this law was called cover, coverture law. If you don't know what coverture law is, Korea used to be this way, right? Korea, Confucian society, a woman did not have any legal standing, right? When you were a daughter, you're the sort of the property of your parents, of your father, I guess. And then when you grow up, you get married so that you become sort of the legally the property of your husband. And once your husband passes away, you need a son because only a son could give you some kind of legal protection. You become the mother of a son. Um, Coverture is where same thing for Western societies, right? They did not have any legal standing. That's why you wanted to get married to a good man so that you could become his wife. This is the whole tradition of a woman changing her last name, right? You change your last name from your father's last name because you were your father's daughter, and then you change your last name to your husband's last name because legally now you're part of his, I don't want to say possessions, but that's what it was. Legally, you did not have any independent standing. That's what coverture was. And so that's why some women, there was a movement for a while. We shouldn't have to change our names. And I think they're free to retain their last names if they don't want to change their last names. But I don't think that took hold in society. So it's just become part of our tradition now. When a woman gets married, she changes her legal last name to her husband's last name. Um, right. So when marriage covered a woman's identity, so this law, I think, only disappeared sometime in the 20th century, the law itself. Sea change in women gender relations by the end of the 20th century. Feminism promoted widening gender equality. Women attained the right to vote. They called it suffrage. Again, that only happened in the modern times. To get educated, women couldn't go to school. To get a job and build a career and to own properties. They would get into a lot of trouble trying to buy some property, like a house or an apartment, right? people would look at them funny. Are you not planning to marry? Why are you buying yourself a house? Because I want to. I want to own a house. Why? Don't you want to get married? Sorry. So that was a thing that happened. If you think about it, only in the last, what, about 100 years, right? That means before then, we don't want to equate it with something like slavery. It's not slavery, obviously, but for all of history, women were in a certain relationship with the other gender. And it was only in the last about 100 years that this thing changed. And different patriarchal systems are still being pushed to treat women as men's equal because the world hasn't totally caught up to the sort of the gender relations change. So that's why only women talk about this, right? Men don't talk about glass ceilings, but only women talk about breaking that glass ceiling for positions, religious traditions. Korea should be proud because we got ourselves the first woman president in the person of Park Geun-hye, right? A lot of reason to be proud. Of course, Park Geun-hye didn't end that well, so um, but at least she broke that glass ceiling. This thing about pushing patriarchal systems, I think I mentioned this thing about sati, right? The Indian tradition. It's an especially horrific tradition that developed in India where they didn't have to force the woman. It was just the cultural norm. It's a psychological terrorism, I guess. The woman was pressured psychologically to kill her, end her life with her husband so that she could show everybody how much she loved her husband, right? I am willing to follow my husband. If he is not here, I don't want to live anymore, right? So that was the tradition. I don't think anybody practices sati anymore in India because it's such a horrific thing. Maybe these incidences would happen once in a while in some isolated rural areas, right? Where people it gets mixed up with things like religion, religious beliefs. I really am heartbroken. And some women, it's a psychological thing too. You get depressed, right? If you really, really loved your husband and you do become suicidal, right? So but I think this is basically gone these days. The other thing, the other thing is still with us today. Even today, there is this thing called honor killing. I don't know if you guys know about these things. In some cultures, this isn't just India, like some cultures in some places, they still have this idea that women are supposed to be honorable. It's okay for men if they play around a little bit, right? Because men will be men. But if a woman were to lose her honor, then it is up to her family members, her loved ones, to regain her honor and the honor of their family by killing her. It still goes on today. It's a weird thing that still persists. Um, a girl, I don't know, maybe in India or Pakistan, some place like that, she starts dating somebody who's I don't know, maybe a Christian or somebody, right? A different religion. And then her father says, no, no, break it off, right? You shall not dishonor this family. Oh, I love him, father. And then she marries him. The next thing you know, the father has killed his own daughter. Why'd you do that? For our honor. She has dishonored our family. What is that about honor? If his son was playing around with a woman, a loose woman of, questionable moral character, right? Oh, let him be, he's just being a guy, he'll grow up. There's no question of dishonoring your family if a son does something. Nobody kills their son to regain their family's honor. I've never heard of it. Why is it only the daughters that get killed? And sometimes it's her siblings, her brothers, relatives who kidnap her, right? And then they kill. Like I don't understand why that is. This is still the legacy of the gender relations that's been handed down for thousands of years. So it's a theme. It's a theme. The changing gender relations. That's a major thing that happened in the modern period. Let me just check the time here. Lots of time, lots of time. Uh, Population explosion was another modern, very modern phenomenon. Growth was unprecedented. 1.8 billion in 1914, from what I checked. 1.8 billion in 1914 to now it's 8.2 billion. That is a fourfold, but more than four, right? More than fourfold increase. Never in history was there this kind of growth in population. The I think we talked about the factors last week, right? Last time, like healthcare, public healthcare, modern medicine, science, and all that. Um, Agriculture, golden rice, right? All these things. And relative peace, especially after World War II, there was this relative peace. We could call it Pax Americana. I know many of you get angry when you hear something like that. Pax Americana, the peace of America. During the American century, there was relative peace. We call it, some people call this the Western world order, right? The Western world order, and the United States had built it, intentionally built this liberal Western world order, and this was the period that saw this incredible growth. It's still growing. They don't talk about the population explosion destroying everything now, right? There used to be this scare of population explosion. Everyone's going to die because, we're going to get like exponentially bigger and bigger. That's not what scholars say, but they do say the population will increase up to something like 12 billion by 2100. And then hopefully the curve will start to go down after. But it's still growing. The population is still growing. I know this sounds weird because here in Korea, our experience is totally different, right? Korea is heading toward a what we call a population implosion, a population cliff. We're about to dive off a population implosion cliff. But the rest of the world, population is still increasing. No one is sure about what's going to happen in the future. So these are, I guess, some of the, I don't want to say minor, new beliefs. New beliefs was a thing that happened in the modern period. Traditional beliefs were challenged by these new ideas. Major challengers were, first, nationalism. I mean, that started happening before the modern age, but modern sense of nationalism is really, it's a modern thing that happened, started stirring, started stirring under the surface, right? And then it started accelerating at the end of World War One. And then the dam basically broke after World War Two. Everybody wanted to be, every group of people wanted to be an independent nation. So that's when nations burst into the scene. Nationalism, communism, obviously, is the big thing that happened. The struggle between Western capitalism and I guess Eastern communism. Liberal humanism, what we call liberal humanism, is yet another thing that was nurtured and grew into some kind of maturity in the modern period. What we call liberal humanism, usually very closely associated with democracies, right? So liberal democracies, humanism, they're kind of synonymous words. Other variables of regarding the new beliefs, the belief in consumerism. I don't want to talk about things like that because we don't want to deal with economics. But consumerism is a kind of belief. Maybe it's not belief as much as some kind of addiction. I think modern people are addicted to consumerism. we're all we all see it, right? We can't live without buying new things. Consumerism is basically I need to buy. I have to buy. I have to keep buying new things. I'm not happy with my old phone. Why? What's wrong with it? I don't know. There's nothing wrong with it. I just want to buy the new phone coming out or TV or the car. So consumerism has definitely taken over. I guess it's a kind of mentality, right? It is a kind of I don't know if it's ideology, but it is a kind of belief that in order for me to be happy, I constantly have to buy things and consume things. Modern democracies, belief in democracies, that is a new thing. The idea of globalism, I guess I should tell you, I'm obviously, because I'm teaching world history, I'm a globalist. I would call myself a globalist. Globalism is a little bit different from globalization, which is a process that happens under globalism, I suppose. This is a thing that surprised some scholars, at least some scholars, religious fundamentalism. There was a view with like things like modernization theory and other people who thought they were really smart. They thought as we modernize, as we keep progressing, science, we live in a world of science now, right? Religion is going to fade away. Religion is going to become less and less of an influence on people. And in some ways, that is true. That is true. More people are becoming, I guess, less religious, and traditional religions are not as popular anymore. But what people didn't see was the rise of fundamentalism, extreme forms of religion. It's happening everywhere, right? It's not just Christianity, it's not just Islam, it's other religions too, like Hinduism, Buddhism. You're getting extreme forms of these religious expressions all over the world. So there's got to be some kind of explanation for it, but religion is not going away. It's only in some cases it's only hardened into this what we call fundamentalism or religious extremism. Um, Unexpectedly persistent tensions between the old and new ideas. So this usually it's like one idea replacing another idea. What is old is discarded, what is new is embraced. That used to be sort of the pattern of history, but in our modern age, we see persistent tension between the old ideas and new ideas. The old ideas are not going away, and so they keep striving against each other or struggling with each other. So that is yet another pattern or characteristic of the modern period. The new beliefs, especially cultural new beliefs. Let's see. I think this is the last one. Uh, the age of science. So I don't want to talk about this too much because I do plan to talk about these things when I give you that lecture on the story of science, right? That's coming. But the age of science, it has to be a major theme for the modern period. But Mr. Lee, you've been talking about this ever since the early modern period, right? We talked about this ever since. You talked about, oh, how important science is, how the Western Europe, they took hold of modern science, the birth of modern science revolution, all that. You've been talking about this ever since the early modern period. It's not the same thing. The thing that happens starting from the modern period is qualitatively different from anything that came before the modern age. So again, this kind of thing, we have to be a little bit careful because we are still in the modern period. We're still in it. So we're not out of it. There's no distance of time, history. There's no distance. We're actually still in it. We're still in the age of science. So maybe we can't be totally objective. But I have a hard time imagining what comes after the modern period. Like, how would historians um, set a boundary between this period and sometime, let's say like 50 years from now? Would they call it something else? What comes after modern period? I think in some disciplines, people talk about postmodernism. We have gone past modernism, the modern period. We're in a postmodern age. I don't think that works. I don't think postmodern period is a historical period. It's just something artificial that some scholars came up with, and I don't think that works. Again, it does not reflect the reality that we live in, right? The reality is there is no such thing as postmodernism. We're still living in the modern age. So let me go through the age of science. Before the modern period, rise of modern science began in Europe starting from 16th century with the likes of Galileo, Newton, Darwin. I think I said started officially the thing kicked off with Copernican revolution, right? Copernicus when he published the geocentric solar centric uh, model of our solar system. But Newton is considered one of the defining figures. Um, he married heaven and earth. And then Darwin, with his theory of evolution, these big breakthroughs happened before the modern period. Industrialization, modernization, all these things happened, of course. But the 20th century science seems dramatically different. Do I? Yeah, I don't want to talk about these things. Uh, Dramatically different. By that, I mean like Einstein's theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, the nuclear bomb, fusion. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of these things. I'm just going to list them, right? Modern warfare, technology altered warfare. This is a big shock. We'll talk about this next week, right? This was a big shock to all the powers. The power of technology. They could not imagine that World War One would play out the way it did. And it played out the way it did because of modern uh, military technology. Machine guns, airplanes, tanks, gas, flamethrowers, zeppelins, submarines, all these new wonderful devices, pale in comparison with the atomic bomb. That was a new thing. Yeah, uh, I've been saying this in my head these days. You know, the saying, new thing, a new thing under the sun. Who knows what I'm talking about? There is nothing new under the sun. Does anyone recognize that? No? Do I talk about this? Yeah, I still have lots of time. Maybe we'll even finish a little early. Uh, this is a passage from the Bible, I believe. It goes like, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity, says the philosopher. The philosopher is supposed to be King Solomon. And it says, there is nothing new under the sun, right? What came before will come again, right? There is nothing new under the sun. Everything works in cycles. We are born, we grow old, and we die. And then our children take our place. There is nothing new under the sun. And yet, in 1945, we saw something that was new under the sun, an atomic explosion. Until that time, the only atomic explosions happening were inside the sun. The power of the sun itself, right, was ignited on our planet, and give or take a couple of decades, now we have the power to destroy the entire planet, right? There had never been anything similar, anything like it. We have the power to destroy the entire planet, right? Before the atomic bombs, it was, we will destroy you. I mean, by you, I mean like your nation, right? Some cities, maybe all the human beings will exterminate every one of you, right? Nobody thought about destroying the planet because that was unthinkable before the atomic bombs. I mean, some people still think, yeah, sure, even if you explode all the bombs, it's not going to destroy the planet because they can't think of the planet itself dying. But I think, some scientists at least, they are afraid we can actually kill the planet with our awesome, awesome cutting edge bombs. So regarding modern warfare, I'll probably end up talking about NPT again later on. NPT is this wonderful thing that happened in 1970, where the UN and the superpowers, I guess the United States, the Soviet Union, and I guess China, all the major powers managed to convince the rest of the world please do not build atomic weapons. It was a neat trick. If you think about it, right? They fooled everybody. The United States, the Soviet Union, they fooled everyone. They said, we're going to kill ourselves. If you guys build atomic bombs, right? One day we're going to have a nuclear war and everybody dies, right? Please let us step back from the brink of annihilation, right? We're at the edge. If we fall off this, there is no coming back because atomic weapons are not like conventional weapons. We do not survive a nuclear war, right? Let us step back from this insanity. Let us sign the NPT, Non-Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. And everybody, they agreed. Everybody signed. Well, almost everybody signed, except countries like India and Pakistan. Israel, we don't know what they're doing, where they are. And the five nuclear powers, the United States, Russia, I think I actually have a map of this because I think this is, people don't appreciate what a big thing this was. NPT, right? When like we talk about NPT, they think, well, it's just an old treaty. Why do you think this is such a special thing? This is the way humanity survived and maybe still survive, right? This is the only way our humanity could survive. So parties, all the blue, these are the countries that signed the NPT treaty. And then you have one country, only one country in the world who signed the treaty and then withdrew, and that is our neighbor to the north, North Korea. The only country that signed and then withdrew. And then some of these other countries, they never signed the NPT because they wanted to be nuclear powers. India, Pakistan. We are recognizing North Korea now as a nuclear power. Not South Sudan. It's just they never signed, but they're not a nuclear power. Israel never says whether it's a nuclear power or not. And that's by some kind of political correction, political calculation, I should say, sorry. So China, France, Russia, United States, United Kingdom, these are the five nuclear powers. And what they said in signing the NPT, what they said was, we will get rid of our nuclear weapons too. We will. We promise because the world is a much safer place without nuclear weapons, right? Only God should be allowed to use this kind of awesome power, right? Let us get rid of these nuclear weapons. We promise we will start to reduce our nuclear stockpile, and then one day, the day will come when we will be nuclear weapon free. It's been, I guess, about 55, 56 years now, right? And the rest of the world is still waiting for that promise. They made a promise. All the nuclear powers, they made a promise. We will get rid of our nuclear weapons. Please be patient, right? There's an ideological struggle, all that, communism, existential, the world is not a happy place right now. Please be patient. And we're still waiting and still waiting. Apparently, China is not talking about any kind of negotiation. Did I talk about China in this class? They're not talking about nuclear weapons at all until their aim is to reach parity with the United States. Because they feel like having 1,000 nuclear weapons isn't enough, right? So they want to increase it to, I don't know, maybe like 3,000 or 5,000 so that they have parity with the United States and the Soviet Union. It's to the rest of the world looking on, it's madness, right? It's madness. But what can you do? So the NPT, I want to emphasize this is probably the only way humanity could survive a nuclear holocaust, what we call the nuclear holocaust. So that's modern warfare. Space exploration is, I'm not like gung-ho about space exploration, but it is, again, a new thing under the sun. It only happened in the 1950s, right? And then the entire world watched in wonder, as if we were watching some movie, right? We couldn't believe what we were seeing. with our own eyes, Apollo, Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. We actually went to the moon. We've been looking at the moon for all of our history, right? And then somebody landed on the moon. Space exploration is a new thing under the sun. Space race in the 1950s, United States, USSR, it ended with the Apollo moon landing in 1969. President Kennedy said, he made a prediction. We will land a man on the moon by the end of this decade. He was killed in the early 1960s, but his dream pushed everybody on, right? His vision pushed everyone on, and they made it at the end of the decade, 1969. They landed a spacecraft on Mars on another planet in 1976. Voyager spacecrafts, they have actually escaped our solar system. That's yet another thing that was, I guess, I mean, who's ever done anything like that before, right? But they are now in interstellar space, making new discoveries that happened, or they were launched in 1977. I think it was only very recently that they broke out of the solar bubble. I think they call it the solar system. We're in some kind of bubble, apparently. And they broke out of that solar bubble, and now they're in interstellar space. International space stations starting from 2000, apparently. I'm not sure about the exact date. Uh, and then Artemis is what's going on right now with NASA. They want to go back to the moon, but this time actually stay, build stations. Um, I think there's a chance, I'm not sure, I think there's a chance China may get there before the United States. But who knows? I'm not, like I said, gung-ho about space exploration. What has space exploration done for us? Well, just to name some things, satellites, GPS, solar cells, computers, robotics, military technologies, ICBM missiles. Well, that is also a new thing, right? All these are the spin-offs. We have all these things because of space exploration. Professor Stearns, my guiding light, he said of space exploration of the modern period, he said, I can't say anything about space exploration, he said. He's a historian, right? He said, I don't know what to say because we are still in the modern age, right? So we don't know how this is going to end. Maybe 100 years from now, everyone will say this was sort of an inflection moment. This is where humanity began to be spacefaring race, right? This is when the whole thing began with Elon Musk, the great visionary who, we owe our survival, planetary survival. Elon Musk led us to planet Mars. We colonized that planet, and then we, started reaching out to the stars. This is where everything happened. Or maybe we'll just give up because our technology will ultimately fail us. I have some pictures here. This is from Interstellar. I'm sure you guys all saw the movie. It was a phenomenal movie. This is Cooper, the main character. He says, "Mankind was born on Earth. It was never meant to die here." Something like we're not caretakers. We're explorers. We're meant to reach out to space. That's Interstellar. That's the optimistic vision that maybe because 50 years is a long time. 1969, that's what is that? 40, about 60 years ago, right? Let's say 50 years into the future, many of you guys will still be alive, right? Maybe 50 years from now, mankind will have reached another star, another planetary system. You think, well, that's physically impossible. Well, science keeps surprising us, right? With new inventions. Maybe mankind will achieve some kind of near light speed somehow and then start exploring the stars. We don't know. The story of space exploration, this is a chapter that began in the modern period. It's a chapter, right? We began it and we don't know where this story is going. The cynical story of the space exploration is, I don't know if you guys heard of Kessler syndrome. Kessler syndrome is this NASA scientist, he came up with this theory that sooner or later, these satellites orbiting our planet, they're going to start running into each other. And then once they start running into each other, it's going to create what do you call that? Cascading effect, like a domino effect, right? Once these things start breaking up into million pieces, these tiny little pieces, because they travel at such high speed, they're going to eventually start hitting other objects in our orbit, different orbits, and then it's going to create this cloud of junk. We're basically polluting our own skies. And if this Kessler syndrome actually happens, then space exploration is going to end, right? Because we're not going to be able to send up spaceships. It'll be too dangerous. So they say. So again, the story, who knows how the story will end regarding space exploration. Let me just go through a few more. Science, technological advances have deeply affected and changed us in the modern period. Computing, automated robots, the internet. Who knew the internet? Social media, quantum computing, fusion energy is yet another thing that could change us utterly, right? I mean, it's the promise of fusion energy. If we can actually realize fusion energy, it's going to give us, I mean, they say almost unlimited amount of energy that's safe, clean. It's just water. Could you imagine waking up and you have almost an unlimited amount of energy that's cheap and clean? It's going to transform the world, right? The promise of science. This is getting, SF means science fiction. This is getting science fiction-y. If we change enough, do we actually end up exiting history? That could happen in our period. I'm talking about things like artificial intelligence and synthetic biology. I know this is science fiction-y stuff, but we are squarely in the age of AI now, and we don't know where this story is headed. Nobody can predict where the story is going to take us, right? So it's an exciting time to be alive. If I may become very science fiction-y, people who are in charge of developing AI these days, these are all Americans basically, right? Like Sam Altman, was that other guy, Google guy, Demis Hassabis. These guys, they want to create an AGI, an ASI. And once we have an ASI, artificial superintelligence, it's going to take over from humanity. That's the story that they tell, right? Is that a utopian future or dystopian future? We don't know. But they say, imagine a future where the ASI, the machine, is so much smarter than us, so much faster than us. They don't die. These things are immortals, right? They don't have any quirks of human like emotions. They don't have fear. They're just very, very super intelligent beings that can live forever and ever, right? If they take over history, then humanity will we exit history, just like the Neanderthals with the arrival of the Homo sapiens sapiens. The Neanderthals made their exit. They took their bow, right? Left us some of their genes, and then they took a bow. They went out of history. Could this kind of thing happen to humanity? Hopefully not, right? But the future is, this is why, maybe this period, the modern period, isn't like any other period in history. Uh, yeah, I'm just going to skip this thing. Synthetic biology is yet another new thing under the sun where we have the code of life, and scientists are trying to build new life forms. Maybe some human beings, the billionaires, will end up living for centuries and centuries. And then as science progresses, maybe they'll end up living forever and ever. Could you imagine immortals walking our planet? Hopefully these are like, good human beings. Could you imagine Elon Musk living for thousands of years and every year he takes a new wife and he propagates the entire planet with his descendants? Little Elon Musks running around. I'm sorry. They call this kind of future transhumanism, right? That human beings will transcend being human and will turn into something that is not totally human. This could actually happen quite soon. So these are some of these new themes of the modern period. I just realized I do not have time to. No, I'll just start. I'll just start. So that was the new themes of the modern period. Let me just get started with World War One. This will at least just the 5 minutes. That'll give us a little bit of breathing space for next Tuesday. This is called the trench. World War One is known for its trench warfare. I guess these are the Germans. I think those are German helmets. World War One. Let me just make some introductory remarks, and then we'll dive right in next Tuesday. They say this is Professor Fears. He has some views regarding World War One and World War Two. His view is, by the way, very American. He's very America-centric scholar. He was, I should say, he was. He died. He's an American presidential historian, so his views are very biased. But he said of World War One and World War Two, he said World War One and World War Two were very different wars, even though they are linked together. They are viewed as the same kind of situation continuing, in that they're linked together, but they were very different wars. He said World War One did not need to happen. It was an unnecessary war. World War II was a necessary war. I think this is sort of the common scholarly interpretation of the two wars. World War One did not need to happen. It was just Europeans going crazy. They went insane and brought this upon themselves. World War II was a necessary war. I think Winston Churchill famously said World War II didn't have to happen. It was an unnecessary war. And people think, well, his view of World War II was different. What he meant to say was, without World War One's aftermath, what we did after World War One, World War II did not have to happen. So he was criticizing the victors, like the British government. He was saying because of what we did after World War One, it was inevitable that World War II should happen. So in that sense, he was actually saying the same kind of thing, expressing the same sentiment. In 1914, when World War One started, the world was celebrating the wonders of modern science, economy, and culture. There was this huge exposition that happened between the United States and Britain. Korea has these things once in a while, right? International like expos, we call them expos. Exposition is expos. They had this expo celebrating the advances of modernity and cutting edge science. This was from May 10th to October of 1914. So while they were celebrating, I guess they didn't call it Pax Americana. It wasn't Pax Americana. It was just modernity, right? How we have lasting peace now. All the European countries will never have anything like the Napoleonic wars. We don't have things like that anymore because of globalization. They were celebrating, among other things, globalization because the world economy is so intrinsically linked together, right? At least none of the civilized Western countries would ever really go to war with each other. So they said. And it was during the expo that World War One started. I think it started in like July of 1914. I'm going to start talking about this again next week. Yeah, I don't want to hurry through these things. All right. Well, if you have questions, does anyone have any questions about anything? Please bear with me. I think because World War One and World War Two are major events, right? If I don't finish World War Two by next Tuesday, I'm just going to push it to Thursday. And so it'll take away a little bit from the Cold War. And if the Cold War pushes back into the final lecture, then we'll just take away a little bit from post Cold War. All right, I hope I ask for your understanding. Have a wonderful week, everyone.